We pay a lot of attention to the heroes of the Bible, the major actors. We know, for example, all about Paul and his missionary journeys, but there are minor figures in the Bible who play limited but very important roles. For the last few weeks, we've been looking at some of these minor, often obscure characters, and today we look at one whom Paul praises for the help and encouragement that he gave to Paul when Paul was in trouble. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Thursday, August 17th, 2023. His name was Onesiphorus. His name appears just twice in the New Testament, both in one of Paul's letters to his younger colleague Timothy. We think he lived primarily in Ephesus, though he also visited Paul in Rome, possibly during one of Paul's imprisonments there. Here's what Paul says early in his second letter to Timothy. You are aware that all who are in Asia have turned away from me, including Phygellus and Hermogenes. May the Lord grant mercy to the household of Onesiphorus, because he often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my chain. When he arrived in Rome, he eagerly searched for me and found me. May the Lord grant that he will find mercy from the Lord on that day, and you know very well how much service he rendered in Ephesus. Paul doesn't hand out compliments lightly. His praise of Onesiphorus is therefore all the more remarkable. Here's the background. Paul seems to have visited Rome on at least 2 different occasions. Exactly when is impossible to tell. The book of Acts gives us a pretty detailed overview of some of Paul's missionary journeys, but Paul mentions things in some of his letters that are not reflected in Acts. As a result, it is impossible to know absolutely every place that Paul visited, let alone when he visited there or under what circumstances. But this much is clear. Paul spent a lot of time in prison in many different places. The best evidence seems to be that he went to Rome on 2 different occasions, and on both occasions he was imprisoned. And most people think he was martyred while in prison there. The upshot of this is that in his letter to Timothy, his second letter, Paul praises Onesiphorus for supporting him in his imprisonment. He contrasts Onesiphorus' conduct with the actions of Phygellus and Hermogenes, 2 otherwise unknown characters who seem to have dropped Paul like a hot potato when he got into trouble. By contrast, Onesiphorus made the journey to Rome to find Paul and to give him some form of assistance. Paul doesn't tell us what form this assistance took, but it really doesn't matter. What does matter is that he showed up when Paul needed him most. So there are people in our lives who perform this very same role for us. People who, if we have a crisis, are simply there for us. We don't have to call them and tell them what we need. They just seem to have an innate sense of what kind of help we need and in what situation. They show up when needed just to get stuff done. Sometimes we try to organize these kinds of activities, but that's different from the role played by the Onesiphorus in our lives. Oven goes out and you have company coming? No problem. They provide. Have a surgery out of town? They show up. Lose a family member? They're the ones who come and take charge when we are just too grief-stricken to know what to do next. That's who Onesiphorus was for Paul. And even though he only mentions him twice in this second letter to Timothy, you just get the sense that there was a much deeper relationship between the 2 than he lets on. That's actually one of the problems reading Paul. He was writing letters to churches and individuals with whom he shared some history, and he therefore could assume that the person or group he was writing to knew the story as well. But since we don't share that same personal history, we are sometimes left to piece things together based on minor clues. Doesn't take much imagination, though, to see what an important person Onesiphorus was to Paul. He traveled to Rome, found Paul, and was probably sitting at that time in a jail cell with him. His visit refreshed Paul, and Onesiphorus was not deterred in his mission by Paul's chains or imprisonment. He was that person for Paul. Who is that person for you? And maybe more importantly, with whom do you play the role of Onesiphorus? Because if I do know you, even if you don't realize it, you do. Tomorrow, we meet a couple who, like Paul, moved around a lot to spread the gospel. Their names, Priscilla and Aquila. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.